Isaac Asimov is one of the most influential science fiction writers of the 20th century. His works are built on ideas, dialogue, and complex logic, which makes bringing them to the screen anything but simple. Still, over the decades, filmmakers have made occasional attempts to adapt his work. Some versions keep the spirit of the originals, while others stray so far they barely count as Asimov at all. In this video, I've gathered every screen project connected to his name that exists today. Lost BBC adaptations, a streaming series, several Hollywood films, and even international productions. And of course, if I've missed something, let me know in the comments. For now, let's begin. In 1962, British television launched the anthology series Out of This World, hosted by Boris Karloff. Most episodes are now lost, but one survived, Little Lost Robot, adapted from Isaac Asimov's short story. The plot takes place on a space station where engineers have modified a group of robots, weakening the first law of robotics. These machines cannot harm humans directly, but they may allow harm to happen. When one of these modified robots disappears into a shipment of identical unmodified models, no one can tell which is the dangerous one. The production shows its age. The robots are men in tin suits, moving slowly and never feeling truly threatening. Some tension is there, but many scenes fall flat. Still, the ending works well and gives the episode weight. Little Lost Robot is important today, less for its thrills than for its history. It shows how 1960s television tried to bring Asimov's ideas about robotics to life. The episode is available on YouTube, and I'll leave a link in the description. In 1964, the BBC produced another anthology, Story Parade, and one episode adapted the novel The Caves of Steel. Peter Cushing starred as Detective Elijah Bailey, with John Carson as the robot Daniil Oliva. Only fragments survive today, the opening titles and a few short scenes. The rest was wiped, like much of early BBC drama. Reviews at the time were strong, calling it a rare mix of science fiction and detective story that worked. And since we've already mentioned The Caves of Steel, earlier this year, it was reported that a new feature adaptation is in development at 20th Century Studios with John Ridley, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of 12 Years a Slave, set to direct. For now, no further details are known. Then came another BBC anthology, and once again most of it was wiped. Out of 6 episodes based on Asimov, only 2 survive and can still be found online: The Dead Past and Sucker Bait. The rest, including Satisfaction Guaranteed, The Prophet, Liar, and The Naked Sun, are lost, unfortunately. We won't go into detail here, but the surviving episodes are worth watching, and the feeling that they are still discussing issues relevant today is hard to shake, especially considering the series is now almost 60 years old, and the original stories are even older. A curious example of Eastern European science fiction television, The End of Eternity, was produced for Hungarian television in 1976. The story follows technician Harlan, sent into a distant future century where he meets Noise Lambent and begins to question the secret agenda of Eternity, the organization that controls human history. The production looks more like a filmed play, with sets that recall stage backdrops and psychedelic electronic effects. Costumes are extravagant, colors bold, and the atmosphere surreal. It is clear the film was made on a very limited budget, but it still manages to present Asimov's ideas. Now let's move to Canada. In 1977, a 26-minute telefilm brought The Ugly Little Boy to the screen. The story follows a Neanderthal child pulled into the present through time travel, kept inside a laboratory stasis field. To care for him, the company hires nurse Edith Fellows, played here by Kate Reid. At first, she recoils from the boy's appearance, but soon she grows attached, calling him Timmy and treating him like her own son. The drama comes from this bond colliding with the cold goals of the experimenters. For them, Timmy is just a specimen, while for Edith, he is a child who deserves love and dignity. Despite the modest scale, the film stays close to Asimov's story and conveys its emotional core. If the episode The Naked Sun from Out of the Unknown did not survive to our days, this version can still be seen in a Soviet television adaptation made in 1978. Released under the title The Last Alternative, it follows Detective Elijah Bailey, sent from Earth to investigate a murder on the distant world of Solaria. It is the first crime in the planet's history, and he joins the robot Daniil Oliva to uncover both the killer and the hidden motives behind the case. Like the earlier television productions we've seen, this was made with limited resources. On top of that, the adaptation was based on a censored Soviet edition of the novel, which leaves noticeable gaps in the story. Still, the actors deliver serious performances, and the dynamic between the characters keeps the mystery moving. And after all, there aren't many ways to see this story on screen. For now, this adaptation is the only one that exists. 9 years later, in the USSR, came The End of Eternity. And if we were ranking these adaptations instead of following the timeline, I would place it near the top. Today, it's not hard to find. The film is on YouTube in decent quality and with subtitles, if you're ready for it. Compared to the earlier productions, the visual approach here feels more ambitious. The design of Eternity is heavy and austere, with angular spaces and constant technical detail. It still looks like television of its time, but the atmosphere is more carefully built and the overall tone more serious. And not really a drawback, but something to know going in. It's more focused on ideas than on action, and it often slows down for long discussions. That makes the film thoughtful and clear, unusually faithful to the novel, and it doesn't shy away from underlining the irony that the search for perfection can end in mediocrity. For a late Soviet audience, that message must have been impossible to miss. This one is just bad. Not so bad that it's good. Just bad. Made in 1988, it was supposed to bring one of Asimov's most famous short stories to the screen, but the result is a flat, lifeless production. In the original, a planet with 6 suns knows only daylight, until once every 2,000 years, night finally falls, driving its people into madness. The film version kept only fragments of that idea. Director Paul Meyersberg reduced the 6 suns to 3 and introduced new characters. Shot at the experimental community of Arcosanti in Arizona, the location could have been striking, but instead it looks half-finished and flat. The Los Angeles Times dismissed the result as a low budget and high pretensions, and even producer Julie Corman later admitted she wished she could remake it with more resources. Nightfall should have been a gripping story about how people confront the end of their world, through fear, faith, or reason. Instead, it collapsed into something tedious, leaving Asimov's brilliant concept buried under weak execution. This is a rather unusual example of bringing Asimov's work to the screen. Robots wasn't released as a regular movie, but as part of a VCR board game in 1988. Players were asked to pause the tape at key moments, draw outcome cards, and try to solve the mystery themselves, a kind of interactive detective story. The recorded scenes are still available online, and it's not a lost classic by any means, but Robots is a strange little time capsule, one that, despite its limits, managed to treat Asimov's story with more care than some later adaptations. Although it's often criticized, taken on its own, Bicentennial Man isn't a terrible movie, and perhaps doesn't deserve all the criticism that's been thrown at it. Watched apart from Asimov, it plays as an emotional sci-fi drama about Andrew, a household robot who spends 2 centuries striving to become human. But as an adaptation, it falls short. the sharper edge of the original is lost, replaced by greeting card cliches that turn the story into a tearjerker. On top of that, the film flopped at the box office, largely due to misleading marketing that sold it as a lighthearted Robin Williams comedy. Audiences expecting laughs instead found a far more grounded and depressing experience. That mismatch hurt its chances, and it didn't trigger a wave of further Asimov adaptations. A sequel, Tricentennial Man, was even discussed. But after the poor reception, those plans were abandoned. Then, in 2000, we got another disappointing adaptation of Nightfall. The rights to the story were still with Julie and Roger Corman, and this time Roger Corman himself produced it, shooting on location in India. The story is still set on a planet where night comes only once every 2,000 years, but instead of awe or terror, what we get is a mix of random scenes: cult riots, psychic powers, even handbag duels against swords. The production suffers from the same low-budget problems as the 1988 version. The cast is mostly unknown, and the performances can't overcome the flat direction or the intrusive score. Once again, what should have been a profound story about fear of the unknown becomes a clumsy, uninspired mess. Proof that Nightfall deserves a sharper, more thoughtful adaptation than it has ever received. Since we're trying not to leave out any screen versions of Asimov's work, we have to include what fans often call an adaptation in name only. That's exactly what I, Robot is, and yet it's also probably the most widely known film associated with Asimov's name. His I, Robot was a collection of short stories built around the 3 laws of robotics. The point was to explore how those laws could create complex moral and logical dilemmas, not a robot uprising. In fact, Asimov disliked that cliché and deliberately wrote against it. The film, however, went straight for the rebellion plot. Aside from keeping the 3 laws, it replaced the story's ideas, characters, and tone with an action thriller. But as a blockbuster, it worked. Will Smith's star power, fast pacing, and solid visual effects for its time made it a box office hit and a piece of mainstream sci-fi entertainment. Apple's Foundation is the first major, big-budget TV series to take on Asimov's most complex work. It brings his vision to the screen with modern effects, sweeping world-building, and long-form storytelling that a film could never capture. The books follow mathematician Hari Seldon, who develops psychohistory, a science that can predict the fall of the galactic empire and chart a path to shorten the coming Dark Age. His solution is the creation of a foundation, a group tasked with preserving knowledge and guiding the future. The show doesn't follow the books literally. Timelines are compressed, characters are gender-swapped, and whole new plots and settings are added. Even the Empire is reimagined as a dynasty of cloned rulers. But while much has changed, the core themes remain: the collapse of empires, the struggle between science and faith, and the search for patterns in history. It may not have many die-hard fans, too far from the originals for readers, too slow and heavy for casual viewers, and yet it has already reached 3 seasons, with a 4th currently in development. So, if you haven't watched it yet, it's a series that still deserves a chance. And since you've made it this far, I want to quickly mention a few other screen projects connected to Asimov's name. First of all, Fantastic Voyage. This film about a miniaturized submarine crew traveling through a scientist's body is often mistakenly thought to be based on Asimov. In truth, the idea and script came from others. Asimov was only hired to write the novelization. Because his book came out months before the movie, many assumed the film was adapting him. And it's worth noting that for those who didn't live through that era, novelizations were once very common. In the 1960s and 70s, before home video became available, a paperback adaptation was often the only way audiences could re-experience a movie after its theatrical run. Gandahar is a French animated feature about a utopian planet threatened by mysterious metal men who turn people into stone. In the United States, the film was retitled Light Years and heavily re-edited by Miramax. To boost its profile, Isaac Asimov was hired to write the English-language script, and the credits even billed it as presented by him, a sign of how much weight his name carried in the mid-1980s. The American release added a new voice cast, including a few actors who would later become major stars, and, bizarrely, credited Harvey Weinstein as director, despite his never having directed a frame of animation. It's also worth mentioning the short-lived series Probe. Co-created by Asimov and television writer Michael Wagner, it mixed science fiction with detective drama. The premise followed a brilliant but socially awkward scientist who solved unusual tech-driven crimes, assisted by his secretary, who acted as the audience's point of view. The show only lasted for one pilot and 6 episodes as a mid-season replacement and was never officially released on home media. Still, episodes survive online, and you'll find a playlist with all of them linked in the video description.